is just fake. I mean, most object lessons are fake to begin with, but just a forced one, you guys be like, oh, a big groaner. So I don't have a big object lesson for you guys, but I do have stories for you. So I want to start off with a story. During the early 19th century, following the Napoleonic Wars, a French soldier was captured and imprisoned. He was thrown into a dark, damp cell and quickly forgotten. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, and he had no visitors. No letters, no word from the outside world. In that loneliness, he began to believe that no one remembered him or even cared about him. With nothing but time, the soldier scratched 4 simple words into the stone wall of his cell. Nobody cares for me. Years passed, and eventually word of his imprisonment made its way to a local chaplain who came to visit him. The chaplain brought with him words of hope and prayers, but most importantly, he brought news. News that someone did care. His family had been searching for him for years, and the government had changed, and so soon with that change, the news that he would be released was brought to him, and he was finally a little more excited. Before he left his cell, the chaplain noticed the words that this French soldier had etched into the wall, that he said, "Nobody cares for me." Quietly, the chaplain, he took a piece of chalk and he added 3 more words above those 4 previous words. And he says, "Jesus cares." Sorry, that's only 2. Jesus cares. And suddenly everything changed for that man. His whole worldview had suddenly changed, right? All he'd known for years was this prison cell, and no one had come to visit him. No one knew of him. No letters had reached him. He felt the loneliest you could possibly feel, in my opinion. And then suddenly someone came to see him and brought good news. That his family had not forgotten him, had been searching for him, that the government finally changed enough that he was no longer going to be a prisoner of war, and that he was going to be set free to go back out into the world with his friends, with his family, to be no longer a prisoner. The good news that the chaplain brought changed everything. And so I think the next slide here, Lisa. We'll go one more. You guys can read that. I have a question for you. A question for you guys. And simply the question asks, how many of us like good news? Yeah, right? We all like good news. And if you're like, "Oh, I don't like it, I like bad news," so then I have a serious talk I have to have with you, because no one really likes bad news, because the bad news brings the worst out of things usually, right? When someone comes up to you and they go, "Hey, I have 2 options for you, good news and bad news. Which one are we more likely to choose?" Well, the good news. Unless you go, "Well, tell me the bad news first, so that the good news sounds so much better," right? And so the bad news is your car is totaled. The good news is I saved the radio, right? You're like, "Oh, none of that is good to me," right? But whatever it might be, we like good news, right? It brings a hope to us. It brings great things to us. Like when talking to my kids and everything, they like the good news. We went raspberry picking, as Brian mentioned yesterday with the boys, and I offered a little bit of good news amongst the heat and, the sun and the no wind. I said, "Hey, if you guys pick half of the bucket that you're carrying of raspberries, I'll buy you a Slurpee." That's the good news that they needed to hear, because they started to pick a little bit more. It didn't last too long, after that. They just succumbed to the heat and just, I guess maybe they just tediousness of not being rewarded right away. But for a moment, the good news perked them up, right? It got them excited. We all hope for this good news. But there's something about the whole message I'm going to talk about, that inside of us, we hold good news inside of us. And you guys are like, "Well, of course, very, very simple, Andrew. Good job on saying that." But no, in reality and literally, we hold good news because the gospel itself is translated to good news. Elisa, if you go to the next slide for me. The gospel literally means good news. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are called the Gospels of the New Testament, and the Gospels is literally just talking about Jesus. and his ministry on earth and his death and his resurrection, the good news that the people need to hear. If you go one more slide over for me, Elisa. The Greek word for good news is, if I could say this, euangelion. And you guys are like, well, I don't care about the Greek and what that's mean, but eu means good, and then anglion means message or messenger. Good message and good messenger. I like it because in the ancient world, this word was used to announce a royal victory. How many of us want to have a royal victory in our lives sometimes, something that is conquered, something that we've been dealing with? We like for it to be conquered. That's the good news that we strive for. Our entire lives are kind of worked around good news, right? We strive for the good part of the day. The good part of the day might be when you're done work, right? I think of Elisa when she drives home the 15 minutes from Watson to Nacum. That's probably the good news. She's like, I don't have to worry about work anymore. I have this breathing moment. It's quiet. I have peace. This is the good news that I look forward to. Or maybe if you are a farmer and you are you're finishing your harvest. That's the good news that you strive to look forward to, that you've done all this hard work, you've put all the effort into it, and now it's coming to an end for the season. That's the good news that you strive for. And so the gospel that we hold inside of us is the good news that we carry with us no matter where we go. But the thing is, sometimes there's something inside of us that we don't always recognize and something that we don't always deal with right away. Sometimes it can be a burden on our shoulders because of what we've placed on it, or the leverage we've placed on it, or the weight we've put towards it. And you guys are like, well, what happened to the good news of the gospel there? Why all of a sudden are we talking about this heavy weight? Well, I want to talk to you guys in Galatians. At least I think the next slide is Galatians. We'll go one more. There we go. Galatians chapter 2, it's 3 verses that I want to talk to you guys about today. Galatians chapter 2, verses 19 to 21, and this is what it says. Galatians 19 says, "For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God." Verse 20 says, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." And then 21 says, "I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose." This is the weight that I believe that we've placed on ourselves. Verse 19 is what we've placed on ourselves willingly or unwillingly, even though we know the good news of Jesus Christ. Because verse 19 says, "For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God." What does that even mean? What is Paul writing in this moment? What is the law? What is he getting at this point? Paul says, well, not Paul, but if I can give a small definition of what Paul is talking about the law simply is this, if it can be simply put, is that the law in this context is the holy heart and the character of God. That's the law. And so when we read verse 19, "For through the law I died to law so that I might live to God," Paul's striving through the law to live through the character of God, or to try to obey his heart. The law is perfect and just and is upheld by the most righteous God. And Paul makes a statement here. He's saying for the longest time, before Paul knew Jesus, if you guys didn't know, in the beginning of the book of Acts, you have the life of Paul, also known as Saul, and he was a Pharisee. He was upholding the laws that Moses had put into place, and it was so crazy that the Jewish culture at the time had made 636 laws that you would follow to make yourself accountable or look good in the eyes of God. And so Saul here, he's like, those Christians, those people who follow Jesus, they're not following all the rules that God has set in place through Moses. And so for them doing that, they're wrong. And so Saul, goes out and kills Christians because he's like, they're doing everything wrong. They're not following the law. And so up to this point now, Paul's writing letters because he's encountered the real Jesus. He's finally encountered the grace that Jesus brought when he died on the cross. And so Paul is saying in verse 19, he says, I was trying to live through the law. I was trying to keep all of these rules, all of these laws that God had placed through Moses, but the more that I tried to live through them, the more that I realized I could not live up to the standards of the law. Because, right, I mean, if you go as simple as the Ten Commandments, right, it talks about, do not murder. Okay, well, I haven't killed anyone. Paul has killed a lot of people, right? And it says, things like do not commit adultery. Well, adultery happens in our hearts, whether we do a physical act on it or not. It talks about honoring your father and your mother. We don't always honor our father and mother. And so by the standards on which Paul is setting by the law, we fail by the law. And if we fail against the law, then we are just to be dead in the law. Because we cannot live up to it, but we're judged by it, then obviously we're dead to it. And so Paul is saying, I tried to do that. I tried to follow the rules. I tried to follow the law so that God would recognize me and love me. But he came to the point where saying, I cannot do it. I cannot live up to the law that is before me. He comes to an understanding in verse 20, right? He says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Because if we're trying to justify ourselves to the law, God is saying that I've upheld the laws. You don't meet the standard, and you died to the law because you deserve to die because you're not living up to it. I don't like that. That's not the good news, right? Because we fail in these laws. Even the laws that our parents put on us, right? The rules they put in our household, we don't keep it. If I could bring my kids into this again, we say, hey, one snack at a time, and then you realize that there's the 3 other wrappers in their bedroom, right? Even something that we feel so simple to upkeep isn't easy for the people that are around us. Something that feels so easy to follow isn't as easy as we think. And so you might be asking, where's the good news? Why is Paul talking about living up to a standard that seems impossible? Well, this is the good news part. Because Paul realized in verse 20 that the cross, a great exchange occurred. It says that Jesus gave of himself for us. And so Paul says, I have to let that go. I have to let my standards, not the standards of which to live to Jesus go, but the standards of trying to be right before God by the law. You have to let go of this stuff that you've placed on yourself that I'm failing because I'm not living up to the law that God has given me. We have to let that go. That's the weight that we've placed on ourselves, right? Even as followers of Jesus, we sometimes put these standards on us, on ourselves, that Jesus he had not put anything on you in that regard. But these weird standards that if I could say, I haven't prayed enough and therefore I've failed. And therefore Jesus' grace doesn't apply to me anymore. I haven't gone to church in a long time, and because I haven't gone to church, all of a sudden there's a standard on me that I'm failing, and then I no longer am allowed to have the grace that Jesus has given to me. I haven't opened my Bible in a few weeks or so, but other people read it every day, therefore I'm failing. This standard that I've created and this weight that I've placed on myself suddenly becomes the law, the standard, when Jesus says, that's not what I'm saying. Jesus says, I have come so that the law is not, gone completely, because God still has standards. He still has a holy law that we have to follow, but he knows that we can't, and so Jesus has come to step in place of that for us. Because if we live by the law, we stand before God, and all he sees is that we did not live up to the law. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine going up to God when we pass away, or when he comes back and we stand before him and he goes, well, I have this list of laws and every one of them you did not live up to. We don't want to see God as that, but he has a just, right? He has a just law. He has a holy character that he's holding on accountable to us. And so we stand before him, and if we try to say, hey, well, I went to church, right? I read my Bible, I prayed, right? I did these standards. But he goes, that's not enough. But now you think of it this way, is that it's not now you standing before God saying that the laws I cannot uphold, it's Jesus who is inside of us, who stands before God in between you and God, right? He's the mediator. He's going, hey, I know he could not live up to the standards of the law. But by grace and because of their belief in me, there's the grace and the mercy that God sees Jesus in front of you, not the law. Does that make sense? I might be babbling at this point, but does that make sense? That when we stand before God, whenever that might happen, he doesn't see us. He sees Jesus, his son, if we've accepted him. And that's the good news, is because I don't want to say an impossible standard, but an impossible standard has been set before us. Because of the sin that is in this world, we cannot live up to a holy law. We cannot stand before a just and holy God who is pure righteousness. By anything that we've done in this world, by anything that we do in this world, no matter the goodness that we do outside, no matter how many people we help outside of these doors, no matter how many times we read our Bible, no matter all these standards that we set, we cannot stand before God and claim that we are holy and that we are just and that we follow you. Instead, we go, well, I have nothing to offer besides Jesus. And so Jesus stands in the middle and goes, he's free. Because of what I did on the cross, I am free. And so that's what Paul is saying in verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The life I now live by faith in the Son of God. Stop having impossible standards to try to live up to. Yes, when we accept Christ and when we follow him, we want to change, right? We want to be more Christ-like. But to be honest, each and every day, even as my title as pastor who stands before you and gets to preach words like this, I fail every day, right? Because there's always some sin lurking at the door that is enticing, that wants to draw me away, right? When God says spend more time with me, I am more than likely to go, well, the TV seems really good because I don't have to think. But by God's grace, because of what Jesus did on the cross, he's the one who stands before. Faith connects you so intimately with Christ that he and you become as one person. And I like that. I don't want to bog you guys down too much. I just want you guys to understand what Paul is saying here is that the impossible task of trying to live without Jesus is just that, impossible. Because no matter the good that we do, no matter the right words that we say, no matter how much money we give to the church, no matter how much, we give of ourselves, of selflessness, it will never reach the point where we can say that we are good before God. So don't hold an impossible standard on yourself to going, well, I didn't do this or this. You look at Jesus and you go, I want to be more like you. I want to walk with you. And the more that we do that, the more that we realize the freedom that Jesus gives us through his death and resurrection. I have one more story I want to share with you, and then I will close. And I think this is like the fastest I've done a sermon. Picture this. Picture two Jews by the name of Smith and Brown, right? Remarkably Jewish names, by the way. D.A. Carson told a story about two Jews who were on the eve of the Passover. And if you guys don't know what the Passover was, in the book of Exodus, you have I think it's the 10 plagues of Egypt, and the plagues are supposed to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, and each plague, Pharaoh goes, okay, go, get out of here, and then he changes his mind, and then God sends another plague, and then Pharaoh goes, okay, get out of here. Oh, just kidding, come back. Anyways, the last plague was the angel of death. And what the Jews were supposed to do was they were supposed to sacrifice the lamb and put the door on the doorpost, and the angel of the Lord, or angel of death, would walk by, and it would see the blood on the doorpost, and it would pass over the house. And those who were in the house were free, were spared. And so that is the origin of the Passover, and that's what the Jews still celebrate to this day of the Passover. So anyways, so back to the story. Picture two Jews by the name of Smith and Brown. And it's the day before the first Passover, and these two are having a discussion. And Smith says to Brown, "Boy, are you a little nervous about what's going to happen tonight?" And Brown says, "Well, God told us what to do through his servant Moses. So you don't have to be nervous. And so haven't you slaughtered the lamb and then put the blood on the doorpost so that the angel of death would pass over you? Haven't you done that? Aren't you ready to go? Haven't you packed up all your belongings? Because after this moment, we know that we're going to be set free. Moses says we're going to be set free, so much so that the Egyptians are going to pay us to leave. Aren't you ready to go for all this? Aren't you going to go eat your whole Passover meal with your family in the security and the safety of your house, knowing that you put the blood on your door?" And of course, Smith replies, "Of course I've done that. I'm not stupid, right? If I could do anything to protect my family, I'm going to do that." But it's still pretty scary when you think of it, right? Especially when all the things that happened around here with all the plagues, right? The river, the Nile turned to blood. There was gnats, there was flies, there was frogs, there was boils, there was fire from heaven. And now we have this. Like, with all that's been going on, it seems kind of crazy that all we have to do is put blood on the door frames and we'll be spared. And to be fair, Smith says to Brown, you have 3 children. I only have 1. And so it's okay if you lose one, right? Just in case this is what Moses says doesn't happen and the blood on the doorpost don't happen correctly. And then we lose one of our sons. I only have 1, you have 3. I don't want to lose my only son. And so this is kind of scary. We know the angel of death is passing through tonight. I love my son. I don't want anything to happen. I know what God says, right? I know that God told Moses to put the blood on the doorframe. I know that that is what God says, but I'm still scared, and I'll be glad when the night is over. And so Smith asks Brown the same question, and Brown responds this way, "Bring it on." I trust the promises of God. I know he's faithful. I have no worry holding me back. The hair on the back of my neck is not standing up. I know my kids are going to be spared. I have that confidence in what God has said. And so that night, the angel of death swept through the land. Which one of these two lost their sons? If you said anything besides neither, you're correct. Neither of them lost their sons, but both had almost a different outlook on it, right? One was like, I'm unsure, I'm scared. I don't know if what God has said is going to be true or not, but I'm still in the process. I'm going to trust him. And the other one is pure confidence of that God's promises are true. God's promises are faithful. I'm going to do whatever he says because I know he's faithful. How many of us are more like Smith, where I know God is God. I know there's truth to him, but there's still stuff that I'm struggling with. Just because you're not like Brown, who is confident in the promises of God, doesn't mean that Jesus' victory over death is less compliant to you. Just because of where you stand, whether, like I said, whether the good news feels like good news to you or there's times where the good news doesn't feel like good news, the blood of Jesus doesn't care where you stand. So you got to stop putting these impossible standards on yourself. Of going, I cannot live up to what God is asking me to. He's not asking you to live up to that. He's asking you to live up to the standard of Jesus. And Jesus is so much better. That's why he's the good news, because he brought freedom and forgiveness and grace and mercy to the people who looked at him and people who accepted him. It's the same way that Peter spoke to the crowd of 3,000 men after Pentecost and said, the same man who you crucified is the one who rose from the grave 3 days later, who brought the forgiveness that you all are seeking. He brings the peace that we want. And so it's not the intensity of our faith, but the object of our faith that saves. It's not anything that we can do. No matter how many times you go to church, it's not going to save you. It's only Jesus that is going to save you. And that's the good news, is because even if you don't go to church, I encourage coming to church because of the fellowship that you can have with other believers, and you can talk about the great things that God is doing, and people can pray with you, and you can bring the things that you're struggling with and have support. That's why I love church. But even if you don't get a church, it doesn't mean that Jesus doesn't love you any less. It doesn't mean that Jesus' blood is any less weaker for you. It doesn't mean that what Jesus did on the cross is any less important. And so I'm going to end with this. Stop living up to an impossible task that you cannot do, but live to the good news of Jesus Christ, who stands before you and before God and says, I know they've messed up, but they're forgiven, and because of what I've done, you see me, not bad things that they've done. That's the good news that we hold inside of us. And live like you have good news. Because there's a lot of times that we walk around and there's nothing good about today. You know, maybe your car didn't start, right? And that can really ruin your day. Maybe you got an extra bill. Maybe you got a higher bill. Whatever it may be, like, you know, sometimes we focus on the bad news, but we hold this good news inside of us, and that should be something great that we can shout from the rooftops or tell people. To be honest, like church, last week we talked about the Holy Spirit and how we want to not underutilize the Holy Spirit anymore. When people go, hey, how's your week going? Well, I mean, a little tough week, but you know, it's still good. Why? Because Jesus is good. And Jesus is in me. Start the conversation. Share the good news with people. I'm going to end it there. I want to pray. And then Shirley, do you want me to just play the song? Or do you want to say anything about it? No? Okay. I want to pray. And then I'll go from there. Lord, thank you that there is good news. Thank you that we don't have to try to live up to an impossible standard. It's still a good standard. It's still righteous. It's still holy. It's still just. It's all these things. But Lord, I'm so thankful that Jesus is there in front of me. And that when you look at me, you see your Son. Because he's good. He brings forgiveness. And each day we can try to strive to be more like him. And I pray that we do strive to be more like Jesus. But I pray that the weight that we're holding of going, I failed at this, I didn't live up to that standard, someone else is doing better than me, God, that we live at our own pace where you've called us to be in this moment, to grow in the way that you want us to grow. God, I pray that weight is relieved from the shoulders of everyone here and everyone who has heard us, and that they live in the freedom that you bring. As Paul says, you can't live up to that law, but you can live with Christ inside of you. And I pray that that is a hope that we carry, and we carry that good news. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going to end, Shirley picked a song called El Shaddai, and I'm going to play that for you guys. And then once the song is done, church is done. So sit back. The lyrics will be there. You can sing along.